Have you ever heard words like empath, narcissist, or trauma bond being tossed around everywhere, from social media and psychology podcasts to everyday conversations? But how many people truly understand the depth behind these terms? These are not just trendy labels. They are mirrors reflecting how we love, how we get hurt, and perhaps most dangerously, how we lose ourselves in the process of trying to heal someone else. In today's video, we're diving deep into one of the most psychologically dangerous and often romanticized relationships, the bond between an empath and a narcissist. This isn't just a conversation about psychology. It's an exploration of morality, spirituality, and the very soul of human connection. If you've ever been in a relationship where you were always the one saving, sacrificing, and enduring out of love, this video might just change how you see yourself. Don't take your eyes off the screen, because as we go deeper, we'll begin to unravel the emotional knots you may have carried your whole life. If this topic speaks to your soul, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss other valuable content on healing, psychology, and personal growth. And be sure to watch until the end, because sometimes a single sentence near the end could become the turning point in your journey. There is a quiet yet persistent belief embedded deep in many of us that if we just love enough, stay patient enough, and remain sincerely devoted, then we can heal a wounded soul. It sounds noble, even sacred, but hidden beneath this shimmering ideal is a dangerous blindness. Because not everyone is ready to be healed, not everyone wants to face their wounds, and sometimes the person you're desperately trying to save is the very one quietly pulling you into the abyss alongside them. One of the greatest tragedies in emotional relationships isn't betrayal, it's the illusion of salvation. The illusion that if I love them enough, they'll change. But pause and ask yourself, is it fair that love becomes a project, a mission? Is it fair that you end up carrying the emotional burden for both people? Some people live their whole lives with wide open hearts. They feel others' pain deeply. They're willing to listen, to walk beside, to heal. These individuals, often called empaths, tend to grow up in turbulent environments where reading emotions became a survival skill. But that very sensitivity, if not coupled with self-awareness and strong boundaries, becomes an open door for those who are wounded but not willing to heal, such as narcissists, to walk in and drain them dry. This is not just a tale of psychology. It's a profound spiritual metaphor. The healer and the wounded, this dynamic doesn't just play out in real life. It echoes through literature, religion, and pop culture, from fairy tales to romantic dramas. But perhaps the truth that needs to be emphasized is this: healing does not come from the outside. It begins within. No one can force another to change unless they themselves are ready to confront who they are. True love is not unconditional endurance. Love is not a test to see how much pain you can tolerate. And love is certainly not the place where you lose yourself trying to save someone else from themselves. So instead of asking, how do I change them? The real question is, why do I believe their healing is my responsibility? That question is the first step, painful but necessary, to breaking the cycle of trauma between an empath and a narcissist. To truly understand why someone can love so deeply that they forget who they are, we must ask an even deeper question. Who is the empath? Not everyone is born with an innate ability to feel others' emotions so intensely. More often than not, that sensitivity isn't just a trait. It's a survival adaptation. An adaptation to living in an environment where emotions were unpredictable, unsafe, or even dangerous. Many empaths grew up in homes where emotions were dismissed, suppressed, or worse, used as tools of control. As children, they learned that in order to keep the peace, avoid blame, or simply feel safe, they needed to know how others were feeling. They learned to read every frown, every sigh, every subtle shift in the atmosphere. Over time, they became the emotional cleanup crew for the entire household, for the family, for others who never once offered the same support in return. And that child grew up, became someone praised for being mature, a great listener, so thoughtful. But what few realize is that this devotion came not from free choice, but from survival. Empaths often don't know how to set boundaries because no one ever taught them that they too have needs, that they too have limits. So when they meet someone deeply wounded, say someone with narcissistic traits, they don't run, they stay. They don't see a red flag, they see a calling a sign that says, this is someone I can help heal. And so they dive in, they sacrifice. They love as if love itself is the cure. They endure even when they're hurt. They remain even when they're devalued. Because deep in their subconscious, they believe, if I don't leave, they will change. But that's where the tragedy lies. Not everyone wants to be saved. And not every kind of love is healthy. In the next part, we'll explore more deeply the psychology of the narcissist, why they resist healing, resist change, and how no matter how big an empath's heart is, they often end up the most wounded in these relationships. If this is resonating with you, please hit like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part, where we unveil these truths, not to blame, but to awaken. When we hear the word narcissist, the image that usually comes to mind is someone arrogant, self-absorbed, the center of attention, someone who looks down on others. But that's only the surface. That's the mask. What's more terrifying and more heartbreaking is what hides behind that polished facade. Inside a narcissist is often a dark chamber of untouched wounds. Their inflated self-image isn't born from self-love. It's a defense against the unbearable pain of confronting their real self. They construct a perfect version of who they are. Strong, admirable, untouchable, not out of pride, but out of fear. Fear of being exposed, rejected, criticized, unloved. Many narcissists were once children whose emotions were ignored, dismissed, or twisted into something burdensome. They grew up in unstable emotional climates, under crushing expectations. They were never taught how to handle negative feelings. So instead of processing their pain, they learned to reject it. Instead of accepting their brokenness, they learned to perform strength. And so they built a world of illusion where they're always right, always admired, and never need to change. Then they meet the empath. The empath doesn't just see the mask. They feel the fear behind the rage, the loneliness behind the sharp words, the unspoken wounds behind the need to control. And as if by instinct, the empath leans in. They try to soothe, understand, love. They don't run like others do. They say, with their eyes, their actions, their unwavering presence, I see you, and I won't abandon you. But this is where love becomes a double-edged sword, because for the narcissist, that understanding isn't an opportunity to heal, it's an opportunity to control. They feel powerful when someone continues to love them despite the damage they cause. They don't feel a need to change because someone else is always willing to carry the pain. And so the empath keeps giving and the narcissist keeps taking. The relationship becomes a vicious cycle, one trying to rescue, the other refusing to be free. And here's the hardest truth of all. Narcissists don't want to heal because healing would require facing themselves, something they've spent a lifetime avoiding. In the next part, we'll explore why empaths, despite the suffering, still don't walk away, and how to break free from this emotionally dangerous cycle. If what you're hearing feels like your story or the story of someone you love, subscribe now so you don't miss the next chapter. We'll talk about the cost of unconditional love and how to reclaim your power. The answer isn't simple because the empath isn't just in love with the other person. They're in love with the idea of being redeemed through love itself. They stay because they believe, with fierce and tender conviction, that if they just try hard enough, sacrifice deeply enough, then one day their love will change the other person. But love is not magic. Love is not a miracle drug that can substitute for someone's willingness to heal. And that is what empaths often overlook. They stay not because they're weak, but because they've learned, usually very early in life, that love must be earned through suffering. Many empaths grew up in environments where their emotions weren't honored, where they were only loved when they were good, obedient, selfless. So as adults, they don't seek pure love. They seek a chance to prove they're worthy of love through self-sacrifice. And this is the heartbreaking loop. They stay because they see potential in the other person. They see fleeting moments of softness, apologies, promises. They cling to rare good memories to justify the long stretches of pain. They call it faith, but in truth, it's a survival-based hope, a wound that never fully healed. The empath stays not because they don't understand what's happening, but because they believe so deeply in the story they tell themselves, if I'm just patient a little longer, they'll change. But the truth is this, People only change when they choose to, not when someone else sacrifices enough. And then one day, the empath realizes they've been trying to save someone who isn't even trying to swim. And that's when the awakening begins. The first step isn't walking away, it's looking inward, asking, why do I believe love means enduring someone unconditionally? Why don't I allow myself to leave when I'm exhausted? And most importantly, why do I think I'm only worthy of love if I lose myself to give it? This is where empathy evolves into awakening, where the empath begins to rebuild their boundaries. They learn to say no. They don't leave in anger. They leave with maturity and self-respect. In the next part, we'll break down the psychological mechanics that prevent narcissists from changing and why love without boundaries and truth only feeds illusion instead of fostering healing. If what you've heard speaks to your heart, especially if you're in a relationship that leaves you feeling like no matter how hard I try, it's never enough, hit subscribe. The upcoming chapters may hold the key to helping you break free from this emotional maze. Why do narcissists, despite knowing they're hurting others, despite their promises to change, despite the tears, continue returning to the same destructive patterns? The answer lies not just in their behavior, but in the psychological structure they built for survival. Imagine a child who had to hide their vulnerability just to feel accepted. No one taught them that making mistakes was part of growth. No one comforted them when they cried. No one embraced them when they felt small. So they built a shield, a false self, a persona that always had to be strong, flawless, admired. This is not self-love. This is self-protection from the fear of being unloved, not enough, or unworthy. That false self becomes armor. And the longer they wear it, the more they believe it is their true identity. They confuse admiration with love, control with safety, and emotional numbness with strength. So when an empath enters the picture with real love, with calls for change, the narcissist doesn't see healing, they see threat. Because change requires removing the armor, it requires admitting fault, it requires facing the shame they've spent a lifetime avoiding. Instead of listening, they twist the truth. Instead of owning mistakes, they blame you. Instead of thanking you for staying, they make you feel guilty for not loving them the right way. It's not because they're evil, it's because their defense system is so deeply embedded, every act of accountability feels like an attack. This is why narcissists rarely change, unless they are forced to face consequences they can no longer escape. Complete loss, total collapse, or the depths of unbearable loneliness. But those moments are rare because there's usually someone there to rescue them, to carry their emotional burden. That someone is often the empath. So the real question isn't just why don't they change? It's who is enabling them to avoid changing? And if you are the one who keeps forgiving, keeps understanding, keeps enduring, then you may unknowingly be part of the loop that's keeping them emotionally stagnant. There comes a point when something shifts inside the empath, not because they stop loving, but because they are too tired to keep loving the same way. They're tired of guessing someone else's emotions, tired of love that comes wrapped in psychological abuse, tired of not knowing who they are anymore, beyond the role of healer for someone who refuses to rise. And in that exhaustion, they awaken. The awakening doesn't come with screaming or slamming doors. It comes in silence. On some quiet morning, they wake up and realize they no longer feel the small joys they once did. They look in the mirror and no longer recognize the light in their own eyes. They ask, why does love feel so empty? And then they begin to turn inward, not to blame, but to recover, not to point fingers, but to reclaim their power. The empath no longer asks, how do I fix them? They begin to ask, when did I abandon myself? They begin rebuilding boundaries. They practice saying no. They choose silence over explaining when faced with emotional manipulation. They realize kindness doesn't require self-erasure. That real love begins within, not in saving someone else. And the most beautiful part, they don't become bitter. They don't shut their heart. On the contrary, they become a stronger, more grounded version of love. Someone who can still care but won't be used. Someone who can still give but no longer at the cost of their soul. When an empath walks away from an unhealthy relationship, They don't leave out of hatred. They leave because they've finally learned to love themselves enough not to stay. They choose truth over illusion. They choose themselves over a version of love rooted in dependency. And in that journey, true healing begins. Not by saving someone else, but by reaching out to embrace the inner child within them, the one who once believed that love meant enduring pain. There comes a moment when the empath realizes staying is no longer an act of love. It's a repetition of an old wound. And healing that wound doesn't come by trying harder, it comes by knowing when to let go. Letting go is not a failure. Letting go is not selfish. Letting go is the bravest act of all. When you finally understand that love should never cost you your soul. After all the turmoil, the empath steps out, not in screams, not in rage, but in awareness and peace. They no longer need apologies. They no longer crave recognition. They no longer wait for the other person to finally understand because they understand. They understand that. No one can change unless they're willing. No one has the right to demand your love if they can't respect you. And no one, no matter how deeply you love them, should ever make you forget who you are. When the empath lets go, they aren't just walking away from a relationship. They're walking away from an old version of themselves. The one who believed love meant bearing the burden, sacrificing identity, rescuing others at the cost of their own wholeness. And then life begins again, quietly, gently, not with fireworks or grand declarations, but in the soft return of the simple things. A peaceful sleep, a nourishing meal, a day unclouded by someone else's anger. They begin to relearn self-love. They stop chasing validation in someone else's eyes. They start doing things that bring them back to life, learning something new, reconnecting with friends, spending time on passions once left behind. And somewhere along the way, in the midst of ordinary days, they smile. Not because everything is perfect, but because they are okay. They no longer feel the urge to save anyone. But if someone enters their life with honesty and maturity, they're ready to love again, this time with both heart and healthy boundaries. Because real love doesn't come from extreme sacrifice. Real love comes from two whole people who understand that love means growing together, not breaking together. What you've just experienced isn't just a story about a relationship. It's a journey inward, a return to yourself, a journey where you learn to love without abandoning your own soul, where you learn to let go without seeing it as a defeat, where you learn to say enough to what no longer deserves your energy. If you're still caught in the spiral of emotional exhaustion, please remember this. You do not have to suffer to be loved. You do not have to be perfect to be chosen. And you absolutely do not need to rescue someone else to prove your worth. True love will never ask you to give up your peace. And you, even in your brokenness, are still wholly worthy of a gentle kind of love, one that begins from within. Thank you for listening. If you saw yourself in this story, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue walking together on the road to healing, rediscovery, and the quiet strength that comes from loving yourself first.